G'day guys, how are you going? So I recently went on a trip to Minsk in Belarus to visit the Wargaming development team. Here I am with a whole bunch of other community contributors and a few Wargaming staff, and we're going to visit the Great Patriotic Museum in Minsk, which is pretty much about World War II. So I hope you guys really enjoy it. It is all HD footage, so you guys can go on a tour just like I did.
And the Great Patriotic War was the war of the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany, and our museum is dedicated to Belarusians who participated in the Great Patriotic War in the Second World War. So this is the new building of the museum, which was opened on the 2nd of July 2014, while it was the 70th anniversary of the liberation of our republic. And the first museum of the history of the Great Patriotic War was opened on the 22nd of October 1944. During the Second World War and during the Great Patriotic War, it was decided to form a museum which was dedicated to the struggle of Belarusians against Nazis. So the Second World War started on the 1st of September 1939 when Nazi Germany occupied Poland. But the Great Patriotic War began on the 22nd of June 1941, in 2 years. And here, in the biggest hall of our museum, we will see the development of Soviet vehicles during the war. From first days, the Red Army had to retreat, and sometimes soldiers left half-destroyed cannons and guns. And here we have installation which shows the repairing of the cannon by partisans. So here you can see that partisans put half-destroyed cannon on the wheels from a cart. Well, partisans used it against Nazis, but when they were out of rockets, they buried the cannon in a forest. And after the liberation of Belarus, the cannon was found once again, and it was pulled across the streets of Minsk during the Partisan parade on the 16th of July 1944. And here you can see how the cannon looked like. So this is 45mm cannon, model of 1937, and there was a nickname for that cannon. Soviet soldiers used to call it Farewell Motherland because, well, the shield was too small to hide behind it, and quite often they died. The installation here shows the beginning of the war when civilians tried to escape and soldiers and officers tried to defend their motherland somehow. Before the war, on the territory of the Soviet Union, there were collective farms, also called kolkhozes. And the truck in front of you, well, this is SAA model of 1932, belonged to one of the collective farms. But when the war began, everything was sent to the front to help the army, and the truck also was sent to the front line, and the driver of the car was Pavel Mikhailov. So during the war, Mikhailov was twice wounded, but each time he returned to his car. He brought food to siege Leningrad, he rescued children from the city, and when he came home, the car was in an excellent condition, and the Red Army gifted the car to the man. Well, it was common property of the collective farm, and it became his own. And he worked as the driver for the rest of his life, but after his death, his family gifted the car to our museum. And you know it's still working, and it is a kind of a movie star. It was filmed in a couple of Russian and Soviet movies about the Great Patriotic War. So ram attacks were the way to stop the enemy, and here you can see T-34-76, which was rolled into enemy's T-310. And one of the first 10 ram attacks was made on the 26th of June 1941. Three brothers, who were the crew of the tank, rolled their tank into enemy's one because their tank was on fire. Well, all of them died during the first ram attack. Soviet pilots did the same, and here you can see a model of Soviet fighter I-16, which was rolled into Nazi's Messerschmitt plane. So the aim of Soviet pilots was to destroy wings of enemy's planes, because after that they were able to land. Well, the aim of Soviet pilots was to stop the enemy but not to die during the ram attack. And on the first day of the war, there were 8 air ram attacks in the sky over our republic. Well, here we have examples of mortars and mine throwers of different calibers, which were used during the war. In the showcase here, handheld mortar RMN 50. So mortars of that kind were produced for NKVD officers. Well, NKVD was a kind of interior troops in the Red Army. Well, sometimes anti-aircraft cannons were used against tanks because only those cannons were powerful enough to stop enemy's tanks. And since 1942, 45mm cannon looked like that. So here you can see that the barrel of the cannon became longer, but the shield as small as it was. So, this way. So, the Great Patriotic War started on the 22nd of June 1941 at 4 a.m. when Nazi troops crossed the border with the Soviet Union. Well, the army of Nazis, or the Wehrmacht, was divided into three parts. Army Group North aimed to Leningrad. Well, nowadays this is St. Petersburg in Russia. The aim of the Army Group North was to occupy the city, but it didn't happen, and that is why it was decided to encircle the city, and the siege of Leningrad lasted about 900 days. Well, people there suffered from starvation, and just in winter, when Ladoga Lake was frozen, they got some help. Army Group South aimed to Kiev, the territory of modern Ukraine, and to the southern territories of the Soviet Union, and that army group was stopped at Stalingrad. So here was the longest battle of the Second World War, which lasted 200 days. Well, nowadays this is Volgograd, well, the name of the city. The biggest Army Group Center aimed to Moscow, the capital of the Soviet Union, and that army group moved across our republic. This is our Belarus. Well, we are in Minsk right here, and well, according to Nazis' plan of the flashlight war, well, the plan Barbarossa, Nazis were sure that, well, 6-8 weeks would be enough to occupy all those territories till that blue line, and they would win. But in fact, it took about 2 months to occupy our republic, Belarus, and that is why Nazis were involved in long-term war, which was unexpected for them. Well, first people who met the enemy were border guards. Well, here you can see their uniform. Officers used to wear green hats. The Soviet Union included 15 republics, and border guards, they were gathered from different republics. They were very brave and courageous men who continued to struggle even if they were captured. And that is why there was an order, and Nazi soldiers didn't catch border guards as prisoners. They tried to kill them. Well, on the border of the Soviet Union and on the border of our republic in Brest, situated the Brest Fortress, which became a hero fortress in 1965. Well, on the photograph here, well, you can see a small part, a small fragment of the fortress on the eve of the Great Patriotic War. Well, Nazis planned to occupy it in a few hours, just on their way to another point, but it took more than 30 days to occupy the fortress. Well, bricks melted, iron melted there, but the defenders of the fortress didn't surrender. When the war began, there were about 3,000 soldiers, officers with their families, so there were also women, children, and well, sometimes the defenders left inscriptions on the walls. Well, here, well, a fragment which was brought to our museum. The inscription was made on the 26th of June 1941, and well, it's written here. We were free, we were in a difficult situation, but we kept up our spirit and we are dying as heroes. And well, it was the mood of the fortress, the mood of the country. People there were ready to die for their families, for their motherland, but well, they were not ready to surrender. And one of the evidences of the defense was the body of Lieutenant Naganov. Well, his photograph here in the corner. Well, that is his shirt and well, his documents. His body was found in 1949. He died because after a huge explosion, he was covered with wounds. And when he was found in his hand, he had a gun with 2 last bullets, and one of the bullets was into the barrel, well, of his gun. Some basements of the fortress defended more than 50 days, And by the time, well, our republic was almost completely occupied by Nazis, but they also had to struggle against Soviet soldiers in the basements of the fortress. And there was one more famous inscription on the walls of the fortress. Well, we will die, but we won't leave the fortress. And well, it's actually happened because almost all defenders of the fortress died there during the defense. Most of Soviet planes were destroyed at airfields in first hours of the war. Well, you can see it on the photographs here and there. And it was made by Nazis because they sent a lot of aircrafts first to destroy different military objects on the territory of our republic and on the territory of the Soviet Union. On the photograph here you can see Minsk after enemy's aircraft attack on the 26th of June 1941. Well, this is Svoboda Square, not far from our museum, and you can see that just the church on the hill survived. During the defense of Minsk, well, soldiers used so-called Molotov cocktail, and here we have, well, factory-made cocktail with instruction for soldiers how to use it. And on the picture here it is shown where that cocktail should be thrown to stop, well, enemy tanks. Sometimes it is shown in different movies when a soldier laid on the ground or hit somewhere, waited for the enemy's tank to move further, and after that the cocktail is thrown at the back side of the tank. So there was the engine, and it was the only way to destroy it with the help of Molotov cocktail. Minsk was occupied in a week after the beginning of the war. Nazis moved further, and they came to Mogilov. Well, it's a city in the southeast of our republic. The defense of Mogilov lasted 23 days, and the commanders of the defense were Major General Romanov and Colonel Kutepov. Well, 10 days Mogilov was encircled, and well, there was a huge tank battle at Voynich field. Well, some photographs here were made, well, during that battle. So, the 3rd Tank Division, well, I mean Nazis division, was sent to, well, destroy the defense of the city, and, well, Soviet soldiers destroyed 39 enemy tanks. Well, it was a lot, because when the war began, tanks of Nazis were, well, better than Soviet. And one of the participants of the battle was Konstantin Simonov. Well, after the war, he became famous Soviet and, well, Belarusian poet and writer. Well, he's on the photograph here. Well, he was so impressed and inspired by the courage and heroism of Soviet soldiers that he asked his wife to throw his ashes there at Voynich field after his death. Well, she did it in 1979, and nowadays there is not only a huge memorial dedicated to the battle, but there is also a huge stone with the name of Konstantin Simonov on it. So the Red Army retreated, but it was very important to rescue different banners and flags, which were the symbols of the army. And here we have the banner of 84th Artillery Regiment, which was rescued by Helen Mikhnov. Well, she's in the photograph here. Well, the brave woman hid the banner somewhere in her house, but it was very dangerous because when Belarus was occupied, it was strictly forbidden to have anything connected with the Red Army, with the Soviet Union, well, any badges, any banners, well, any flags, and the punishment was death. But she did it, she rescued the banner, and after the liberation of her village, she gave it back to the Red Army, and nowadays you can see it in our museum. One of the saddest artifacts in our museum was found in 1992. Well, you can see that it's a human bone which was depressed into a flask. And, well, we have a couple of versions what had happened to that man. Well, maybe this is the result of a very huge explosion, or maybe a tank ran over soldier's body. And that artifact also symbolized a tragical situation on the territory of our republic in first weeks of the war, because so many people were killed that even nowadays we are able to find, well, evidences of that kind and, well, different artifacts which reminds about, well, first battles. So civilians tried to escape, they took money, personal belongings with them. Soldiers tried to defend their motherland. by all means, and a lot of enemy's aircrafts were in the sky. So finally our republic was occupied by Nazis and they moved further. But on their way to Moscow was Smolensk. And in the showcase here you can see, well, some artifacts and photographs which shows the defenders of the city. Well, the Battle of Smolensk lasted more than 30 days, and that battle gave a chance for the Red Army to be prepared for the Battle of Moscow. Because when the retreated troops participated in the Battle of Smolensk, well, the troops which situated at far east came closer to the capital of the Soviet Union, and when Nazis came to Moscow, it was ready. Well, a lot of Belarusians participated in the Battle of Moscow. One of them was Boris Kovzan, well, on the photograph here, a hero of the Soviet Union and the only pilot in the world who survived after 4 ARM attacks. Well, another participant was Lev Davadar, well, Major General who was the commander of cavalrymen. Well, that is his photographs, his personal belongings here. So Lev Davadar and his squad, they fought at back areas of the enemy. They brought a lot of damage, and enemy soldiers were afraid of his, of his group, and that is why for the head of Lev Davadar was promised a huge amount of money, but nobody betrayed him. He participated in the Battle of Moscow, and at the very end of the battle he was badly wounded and he died after that. But for everything he did, he became a hero of the Soviet Union after his death. So a hero of the Soviet Union, it was the highest award in the Red Army, and about 12,000 people got that award during the Great Patriotic War. Well, the enemy was very close to the capital of the Soviet Union. On the photograph here, you can see Field Marshal von Bock, well, the commander of the Army Group Center. Well, in his binoculars, he was able to see roofs of the houses near Moscow. Well, Nazis were at about 25 kilometers from the capital of the Soviet Union. But after the battle, they had to retreat. They moved back at about 300 kilometers, and the counter-offensive of the Red Army began. Well, and during the Battle of Moscow, it was decided to celebrate the day of October Revolution. So if you want to, you can take a seat. And on the screen, well, this is Moscow on the 7th of November 1941. Well, the parade on the screen was one of the shortest parades in the history. It lasted about 25-30 minutes. And after the parade, almost everyone who you see on the screen went straight to the Battle of Moscow, or to defend the capital of the Soviet Union. Well, during the parade, Joseph Stalin, who was the head of the country, he made a speech. Well, he tried to inspire, well, civilians to keep up the spirit of soldiers because, well, the enemy was very close to the capital, and it was very dangerous because during the Battle of Moscow, well, hundreds of aircrafts were sent to destroy Moscow. Well, in the center. So, but with the help of 25mm anti-aircraft automatic guns, enemy's planes were stopped, well, near the city. Well, guns of that kind, well, one of them we have right here, were planted on the roofs of the highest buildings around Moscow. The power of the guns was enough to stop enemy's planes, well, near the city, and just some of them reached their aims. Monuments around the museum, and here, for example, you can see famous Belarusian partisans and people who led underground struggle against Nazis. From first days of the war, the commanders of the Red Army started to get letters from women who also wanted to struggle against Nazis. And that is why in October 1941 it was decided to form 3 female air regiments. And one of them, 588th Air Regiment of Night Bombers, was exclusively female till the end of the Great Patriotic War. And women were the pilots of planes like that. So here you can see P-02. Well, this is plywood biplane. And before the war, planes of that kind were used to train pilots. Well, there are two places in the cabin. One was for a professional pilot, another was for a student. And during the war, it was decided to use P-02 as night bombers because, well, the plane was very light, and at night pilots turned off the engine, they glided in the sky, and they could reach and destroy any object in silence. Well, after that, the engine was turned on, and pilots flew away. So, Nazis used to call women pilots night witches. Well, maybe you heard about them. During the war, 90 women became heroes of the Soviet Union, and 23 of them were, well, night witches. Until the end of the Great Patriotic War, night witches didn't take with them parachutes. They preferred to take more bombs and grenades, and they also knew that if Nazis would catch them, they would die and suffer. So that is why, well, they preferred to die during different battles. The heaviest Soviet tank of the Second World War, IS-2, well, the weight of the tank is 46 tons, and that tank could easily destroy any tank, and that is why Nazis didn't attack it in the front part. They had to attack it from the back or from the side. Only then they got a chance to destroy it somehow. Well, IS, this is first letters of the name of the head of the country, Joseph Stalin. Well, in Russian, his name sounds like Iosif Stalin, and, well, first letters of his name, ES, became the name for the tank. And, well, tanks of that kind were used during the liberation of European countries in 1944-1945. Well, a day before the beginning of the war, it was decided to produce machine rocket launchers, BM-13. Well, it was the official name of the construction. Soviet soldiers used to call it Katyusha. Well, and there was one more nickname for that vehicle. It was also known as Stalin organ, like a musical instrument in church. Well, maybe because of the rails, which reminds about that instrumental, maybe because of the sound. Because when it started to shoot, the sound was very loud, well, and horrible. Katyusha was quite unexpected for Nazis. That is why during the war they tried to get just one to find out what's inside, what's the secret. And that is why inside of each Katyusha were planted about 30 kilograms of explosive materials. And when it was surrounded by the enemy, well, Soviet soldiers exploded them. It was easier to get a rocket of Katyusha than the whole construction. And, rockets had special mechanism inside. When someone tried to open a rocket, it's also exploded. Well, and in the showcase here, you can see how the rocket looked like after the explosion. At first, Katyusha was used on the 14th of July, 1941. In 10 seconds, 112 rockets were sent by 7 Katyushas, and railway station Orsha, which was occupied by Nazis, was completely destroyed. Heroes were not only at the battlefields. Hundreds of people became labor heroes, while at different factories which were moved to back areas worked children, women, elderly people, and their aim was to make everything for the front, everything for the victory. People worked 16, 18 hours a day, without rest, without food sometimes, and there were cases when they had to work without any walls or roof over their heads. And installation here shows left Nikto on the photograph in the corner. So a Minsk schoolboy who was 13 years old and he was too small to work at the factory. That is why he had to put a wooden box under his feet to reach different machine tools. And the results of the work of Soviet people you can see in the showcase behind you. Well, different rifles, guns, well, for example, this is PPSH, or Shpagin machine gun, which was mostly widespread among Soviet soldiers. Well, here are different examples of anti-tank guns, well, pistols, revolvers, machine guns.
PPRs, anti-tank rifle.
So in the showcase here, you can see a Riesling submachine gun and Thompson submachine gun. And well, Soviet soldiers got them as part of the help from the United States. In March 1941, the United States signed the Act of Lend-lease. Well, the Lend-lease, it was interest-free loan, and 42 countries got trucks, planes, tanks, medicines, equipment, well, the weapon. But well, after the war, everything should be given back. Or if countries need something, they had to pay for what they need. Well, and on the screen you can see how everything was transported. Well, it's a documentary which was filmed on one of the ships. Well, the northern route was used to transport everything, and well. Now it's the signing of the Act on Lend-lease. Okay. Well, in summer 1942 started the longest battle of the Second World War, called the Stalingrad battle, which lasted 200 days. Well, Soviet soldiers had to fight for each street, for each building, sometimes for each room in the building, and that is why. Well, Soviet soldiers started to wear breastplates made of steel to defend front parts of their bodies from knives and pieces of bombs, grenades. And they also started to use mobile flamethrowers. Well, that construction was able to throw flame in 40-45 meters. And one of the symbols of the battle was the house of Pavlov. So the building on the photograph was named after Yakov Pavlov. Well, he and 25 soldiers occupied the building, and for 58 days they didn't let the enemy to move further. They rejected all enemy's attacks, and when the division came to the building, they started the offensive attack altogether. So for this, Yakov Pavlov became one of the heroes of the Soviet Union. So as the result of the battle, the 6th Nazi army was destroyed, and 23 generals were captured. Well, you can see them on the photographs here. And was also captured General Field Marshal Poles, his interrogation on the photograph here. So it was the first time when an officer of such a high rank was captured by the Red Army soldiers. Well, on the walls here you can see Stalingrad at the end of the battle. So the city was ruined, the soil was filled with iron pieces, parts of bombs, grenades, and the city was in a terrible condition, but the strategic initiative after the Stalingrad battle was on the side of the Red Army, and that is why the importance of the battle was extremely high. So the Stalingrad battle, it was the battle of the Red Army against Army Group South, and when, some troops participated in the battle, Leningrad was still surrounded by the Army Group North. Well, the siege of Leningrad lasted 872 days. Well, people suffered from starvation, and that is why they called the road on the ice of Latga Lake the Road of Life. On the photographs here you also can see, bread line. To get daily bread ration, it was 125 grams. Well, here you can see how it looked like. Well, it was a mixture of everything people were able to find in the city. And, the toughest period was winter of 1941-1942. And, during the first 2 weeks of the winter of 1942, just workers and soldiers got daily bread ration, and the rest inhabitants of the city didn't get even a small piece of bread. To get even that small piece of food, it was necessary to have so-called cars for food, which inhabitants hid in siege bells. Well, here one of them, and they had those bells with them every time and everywhere. The siege was over in January 1944, and by that time, about 1 million people died in the city, and 90% of them died because of starvation. When the war was over, 12 Soviet cities became hero cities. Stalingrad, Leningrad, Moscow, Minsk, one hero cities, and the names of the rest you can see on the walls here. After the Stalingrad battle, the liberation of the Soviet Union began, and step by step the Red Army came to Dnieper, and the installation here shows the crossing of the river. The group of soldiers decided not to wait for any bridges. They just pulled the howitzer on self-made raft and started the crossing of the river. They succeeded, started the offense on the other bank. So for this, Ivan Sambuk, who was the head of the group, became a hero of the Soviet Union. Ivan Sambuk was born in Belarus. And on the cannon you can see 7 red stars. Each star for each destroyed tank. 73% of wounded Soviet soldiers came back to the battlefields because of the work of nurses and doctors who rescued soldiers' lives even during different battles at field hospitals. Here you can see one of them. And when the war was over, 4 Belarusian nurses got Florence Nightingale Medal for everything they did. So one of them was Sofia Kontsevich, she's on the photograph here. Young girl who rescued 147 soldiers during 4 days battle. She pulled them from battlefield to field hospital. Dineda Dusnalogova also got a Florence Nightingale Medal, and she was a hero of the Soviet Union, and she rescued more than 120 soldiers. But in 1943, in November, she was badly wounded, and she stayed at the battlefield. After the battle, in a few days, when Soviet soldiers found her, she was not only wounded, but she was also frozen. And at the hospital, she lost her arms and her legs, partially. She was 23 years old when it happened to her. But the spirit of the woman was very strong, and she decided that she must help to the Red Army. She started to send letters to different factories, to newspapers, magazines, and she asked people to stay after work and to produce just one more extra bullet for the army. And at one of the factories, workers produced 5 tanks and wrote for Zina Tusnalobova on the boards of the tanks and sent it to the front. And before the liberation of Polotsk, it was her hometown, Soviet pilots wrote her name on the rockets. They liberated the city in honor of Zina Tusnalobova. This 5B is the name of the truck, and it was able to pull 3 tons. S-67, this is Soviet Army Jeep, and when the roof and the glass were removed, the height of the car was a little bit more than 1 meter. That is why it was very convenient and could be used in difficult road situations. And here we have Soviet fighter Yak-9. During the liberation of Belarus, French pilots of International Air Regiment Normandy flew on board of planes like that. Field kitchen. It took an hour to make dinner for 150 soldiers. And in the showcases here we have the weapon of the Second World War. So guns, rifles, machine guns, which were produced for the Red Army and for the Wehrmacht. So after the tour you can have a closer look and compare them. So on the walls, photographs which were taken in Minsk after enemy's aircraft attack on the 26th of June 1941. Most of the buildings in the city were wooden, and that is why Minsk was on fire. And after the war, about 80% of buildings were destroyed. And Minsk, which you can see nowadays, was completely rebuilt after the Great Patriotic War. That hall shows the occupational regime in our republic. And from first days of occupation, Nazis started to establish the new order in Belarus. And for that new order, they had so-called Plan East. Well, according to the plan, 25% of Belarusians should become servants for Nazis, and the rest, 75%, should be, well, moved to any other territory and live somewhere else, or they should be killed. Well, and in a moment on the screen we will see a fragment of a Soviet movie, Come and See. It was filmed according to the evidences of Belarusians, and well, that movie shows the process of extermination of civilians. Well, a group of Nazis came to a village. They forced inhabitants to come into a wooden building, which was burned with people inside after that. And during the war and during the time of occupation, Nazis burned 9,200 villages. Well, more than 5,000 villages in Belarus were burned with inhabitants, well, completely or partially. And 186 villages were not rebuilt because Nazis killed everyone there. And nowadays we have a memorial which reminds about all burned Belarusian villages. It's situated in Katyn, well, not far from Minsk. Well, Katyn was also burned by Nazis, and they killed there 146 inhabitants, and 75 of them were children under 13 years old. So, as part of exterminational policy in Belarus, Nazis formed more than 260 places of forced detention, also called death camps. So on the map here, the biggest death camps are marked by black triangles. And well, in Belarus they divided. Well, here we had not only camps for the Jews, but also there were death camps for civilians, for prisoners of war, and for children, because Nazis were sure that the blood of children is very useful for wounded soldiers. And well, on the map you also can see how many people were killed in each Belarusian city. Well, near the name of the city, well, number, which means how many people were killed there. Well, near Minsk, situated death camp Masyukovщина. It was the camp for the prisoners of war, and about 80,000 Soviet soldiers were killed in the camp. On their uniform, they had marks SU, which meant that that man was, well, a Soviet soldier. Instead of their shoes, they got wooden of that kind. Well, no names, just numbers. And the conditions in the camp were horrible because soldiers didn't have anything to eat. Sometimes they didn't have even water to drink. Once a week, a barrel of salted fish was brought to the camp, and 5 soldiers had to divide 1 fish for a whole week. The weight of adult men in the camp Masyukovщина was about 30 kilograms. Well, and here in the showcase you also can see well, different artifacts which were found on the place of the camp. Well, and on the screen is a book with the names of executed soldiers, and in that book we have less than 10,000 names instead of 80,000, because when the liberation of Belarus began, well, Nazis tried to, well, destroy all evidences of their crimes, and they burned not only documents but even bodies of soldiers who were killed. On the wall here, photographs which were taken at different camps on the territory of our republic. Well, photographs were taken by Nazi soldiers, and about 400,000 Belarusians were taken to Germany for forced labor, while trains were filled with boys and girls. Sometimes there were so many people inside that by the time trains reached, well, its final destination, a lot of them were dead inside because sometimes they didn't have enough air to breathe. And well, in Germany, those who were taken from eastern territories had to wear marks or ST on their uniform, and Belarusians had red and white marks, and Ukrainians had yellow and blue. After the war, less than 250,000 of those who were taken to Germany came back, and a lot of them died from different illnesses and diseases because of the work they did in Germany. Well, the installation here shows one of the chambers at SD prison, which is situated in Minsk. All artifacts inside were taken from, well, the real prison. And, well, SD prison was prison for people who were suspected in partisan activities or underground struggle against Nazis. And when someone entered the prison, he or she would never come out. And a few weeks before the liberation of Minsk, Nazis executed all prisoners of SD prison at death camp Trestenets. Well, it took 3 days to shoot all of them, and after that the bodies of prisoners were burned. Well, Trestenets death camp was the biggest death camp on the territory of the Soviet Union, and it was one of the biggest death camps in Europe. Prisoners there were shot to death in front of a wall which was covered with iron. Sometimes Nazis used gas chambers, and after that the bodies were burned and the ashes was thrown around in a field with the help of stretchers like that. And during the time of occupation, Nazis executed there more than 200,000 prisoners, and when the Red Army entered the camp, it was empty because Nazis just killed everyone there. The destiny of the Jews in Belarus was as horrible as it was in Europe, and the installation here shows how many of them were killed in different Belarusian cities. But after the war, it was very difficult to count how many of them were actually killed in Belarus, because here, and on the territory of the Soviet Union, Nazis didn't hide their aims. They just gathered them all together and tried to exterminate as soon as possible. And on the territory of the Minsk ghetto, Nazis started to use mobile gas chambers. It was a truck, but that part was covered with iron, and when it was filled with people and started to move, gas from the engine moved inside. It took about 15 minutes to kill, all people, everyone who was in the truck. But, after that, Nazis had to empty the trucks, and the faces of those who were killed there were horrible. That is why Nazis started to use gas cyclone, and, after that, people inside just fell asleep and, didn't wake up. Nazis started to use gas chambers on the territory of the Minsk ghetto, but Minsk became a hero city because of the underground struggle of civilians, and that is why Nazis started to use mobile gas chambers to punish inhabitants of the city after different acts of sabotage, in Minsk. And trucks of that kind just traveled around the city, and people were caught in the streets and killed. So here we have a wooden monument, fallen awaited eternally. And Michael Kondratiev, who was the author of the artwork, he took 100-year-old trees, and that monument is dedicated to women who waited for their men after the war. Kondratiev found out that one of the villages became so-called widows' village because all men went to the war, but none of them came back. And women also refused to leave the village. They decided to, stay there, and they waited for their, husbands, fathers after the war. And each year on the Victory Day, they came to the road, they read letters and, just waited. Nobody never came, and when the last widow died, the village died with her. Belarus is also known as Partisan country, or Partisan zone, and in that hall we have photographs and personal belongings of the leaders and heroes of the Partisan movement. For example, Vasily Kosh, a hero of the Soviet Union, he was the commander of the first Partisan brigade in Belarus. Feodosy Pavlovsky and Tikhon Bumashkov, they became first partisans who became heroes of the Soviet Union. It happened on the 6th of August 1941. And in the showcases here you also can see different awards, partisan weapon, and everything connected with Belarusian partisans. Sometimes partisans, they were civilians who didn't want to live on occupied territories and under Nazis' control. That is why they ran away to forests. They lived there, and they also tried to struggle against, Nazis. And one of them was Alexander Azonchik, a hero of the Soviet Union who was a tailor when the war began, and the uniform here, he made it by himself, and his equipment here at the bottom. But during the war, Azonchik became a commander of a very successful partisan brigade. He exploded 37 enemy trains and he participated in more than 150 acts of sabotage against Nazis. Well, sometimes soldiers and officers who went out of encirclement became partisans. And, well, by his bullet, he ran away from death camp for prisoners of war. And, well, during the war, he became the commander of 2 partisan brigades. Well, he lost his arm, and, well, that artificial was made for him by partisans. And he also used that arm when he worked as the director of candy factory Kommunarka in Minsk. Well, that part of our exposition shows, well, small partisan camp. Most of the buildings were under the ground, but you can see that partisans had printed houses. It was very important to inform civilians about the situation at the front. And, well, Nazis also established different, well, newspapers, leaflets, where they told that the Soviet Union is under Nazis' control and Belarusians shouldn't resist anymore. But, well, it wasn't true, and the struggle continued. And, well, here we have examples of partisan, well, newspapers, leaflets, and, well, it was their way to inspire civilians to struggle. Not only adults became partisans, but also a lot of children, and for them there were forest schools, where they learned how to count with the help of wooden sticks, for example, and instead of school bell, a shell casing may be used. Well, here you can see how it looked like. Well, and some photographs were taken during lessons at forest schools. So, of course, there were hospitals at partisan camps. Well, and here you can see different medical instruments and medicines. Well, some of them were trophies of partisans, some of them were brought from different hospitals which are situated in huge cities. And, well, in the corner, well, it's a partisan trophy, well, that instrument which was used by a dentist for to repair. So here we have a kitchen, well, the mill, the butter maker, well, and the oven to bake bread. So, and, well, almost each partisan brigade had communication with the mainland. And here you can see, well, how the radio station looked like. So, at the end of 1943, about 400,000 Belarusians became partisans, but they didn't have enough weapon to struggle against Nazis. And that is why they started to produce their own. And in the showcase here, a small part of our unique collection of self-made partisan weapons. So as you can see, partisans were able to produce mine throwers, well, grenades, machine guns, with the help of any piece of iron they got. Sometimes, for example, they took pipes from the bicycles to produce iron part of a rifle. And they also had a device, you can see it in the corner here. So, and with the help of that device, they were able to remake enemy's bullets, and it was possible to use them with Soviet weapon. But, well, the quality of the bullets wasn't very high, and that is why partisans tried to use them if they had no other choice. But in fact, the quality of self-made partisan weapon was even higher. Well, the weapon was better than the factory-made. So, and here we have one more example of self-made partisan weapon. Well, in 1943, partisans found half-destroyed tank, but, well, they took the cannon, which was able to shoot, they put it on the wheels from a seeding machine, and, well, to make that cannon to shoot, partisans had to bite it with a huge wooden stick. After the liberation of Belarus, in Minsk, there was a partisan parade to celebrate the liberation. Well, the parade was held on the 16th of July, 1944, and, well, that cannon was pulled across the streets in Minsk during the parade. So on the floor, this is our republic with railroads and huge railway stations and territories which colored with red, like for example here and there. Well, this is so-called partisan zones, which were under partisan control at the end of 1943. Well, You can see that huge cities were still under Nazis' control, but, well, small villages, forts, well, they were under partisan control. And in Belarus, partisans also led so-called rail war, because Nazis used railroads on the territory of our republic to transport everything needed from European part to Eastern Front. And that is why, well, during that rail war, which included 3 huge stages, so before the Stalingrad battle, before the Kursk battle, and before the liberation of Belarus, partisans did everything to explode, to destroy railroads, railway stations, well, trains. And here, for example, you can see how it looked like. So partisans exploded rails, and, well, it was made to derail the train, for example. In the showcase here, we have examples of different bombs and grenades which were used by partisans, and at the bottom, well, it's well, an invention of partisans. This is partisan rail arrow. So that device was planted, it was put on the rails, and well, when it was on the way of a train, it just like fell down. It had no chances to survive when the partisan arrow was on the way of a train. And partisans also started to produce explosive materials which looked like coal, because coal was used as fuel for the trains, and they just added explosive well, coal to ordinary, and trains exploded on their way. Well, as partisans didn't have enough weapons, they widely used different trophies, and well, that 20mm cannon Orlikon, which was produced in Switzerland, well, became partisan trophy in 1944. So, and here, motor saw, which was produced in Germany. Well, partisans used it to cut trees and to stop the road communication, and, well, there were some other ways to use it. So, sometimes after small explosions, Nazis reconstructed rails very fast. That is why before the liberation of Belarus, partisans started to, well, destroy railroads. They just hid rails in a forest. And, well, they were able to destroy huge parts of the railroads, well, this way. Well, during the war, about 3,000 volunteers from different countries became partisans. Sometimes there were cases when even Nazis, well, I mean, German soldiers changed their side to fight, and, well, one of them, Fritz Schmenkel, became a hero of the Soviet Union, and Belarusians also participated in the partisan movement in Italy, and here we have a uniform of Italian partisan, and, well, in the corner, photographs of Belarusians who participated in the resistance movement in France. So-called partisan anti-aircraft. One more partisan invention. Well, you can see that partisans took anti-tank gun. They put it on the wheel to move it faster. And with the help of anti-tank gun, well, partisans destroyed enemy's airplanes. So, the first town settlement in Belarus, Kamarin, was liberated on the 23rd of September 1943. But a huge liberational offensive operation Bagration started on the 23rd of June 1944, well, almost in a year. But by that time, well, part of the Gomen region was liberated, and the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd Belarusian, and the 4th Baltic Front secretly gathered forces along the front line which is situated in Belarus. Well, Nazis didn't expect the attack on that part of the front. They were sure that the Red Army would attack them from the side of Ukraine. But, well, it was decided to start the offensive operation in Belarus. And the aim of the Operation Bagration was to liberate Belarus and to finish the liberation of the Soviet Union. And during the liberation, the Red Army used so-called pots or pockets. Well, they are marked on the map, well, with blue color, like here. here and here, and the biggest was Minsk pocket, or Minsk port. Well, 100,000 group of Nazis was surrounded near Minsk. Well, they refused to surrender, and after 4 days battle, about 75,000 of them were killed. And it was, well, the biggest port on the territory of our republic. So the toughest time, the most difficult part was to move in the southern territory. Well, here, this is our Belarusian Polessia. Well, this is swampy territory, which, well, covered with bogs, and, well, there are also a lot of rivers. And Nazis were sure that it's almost impossible to move there, but the Red Army started to build log roads. So with the help of log roads, the Red Army appeared there where Nazis didn't expect to see them. So here installation which shows the crossing of the bog. And well, this is T-3485, the third modification of T-34, which was used during the liberation of our republic. So, how do you think? It's a real tank or maybe it's a model of a tank?
Is it a model?
Well, yeah, you're right. But we, well, took 2 small fragments from a real one. Can you guess which parts were taken from the real tank?
Blocks.
Hmm?
The turret.
Sorry.
The turret.
The turret.
No, it's too huge. Well, smaller part.
Tracks.
It was too heavy to put it on the glass
The
wall.
lights.
The lights, yes. And one more.
Log.
No?
The fuel.
No?
That bag.
No.
Antenna.
Yeah. 2 parts. Well, the lamp and the antenna is from original one. So on the script, this is fragment from Soviet movie Liberation, which shows the liberation of our republic. Well, it shows each front, and in the showcase here, well, photographs and personal belongings of the commanders of the fronts and of people who became heroes of the Soviet Union during the liberation of our republic. So, for example, this is the jacket of the general of the army Bagration. Well, he's on the central photograph. He was the commander of the First Baltic Front. Well, during the war he was the general of the army, but when he gifted the uniform to our museum, he became the marshal of the Soviet Union. That is why here you can see his marshal uniform. Well, this is map case of the general of the army Zakharov. Well, he's on a photograph here. He was the commander of the Second Belarusian Front. Well, and here we also have Frontline of the one of night witches. Well, on the photograph here you can see Irina Sibrova. Well, who was the commander of the unit, and she accomplished 940 missions. It was the highest result among, well, night witches, among women pilots. Well, you can see them on the photograph near the dress. And, well, this is the jacket of the Marshal of the Soviet Union, of the Marshal Rokossovsky. He's on the photograph here. He was the commander of the First Belarusian Front, and, well, most of his awards he got during the liberation of our republic. Well, when Minsk was liberated, just a few buildings survived, and here the red banner, well, the assault banner, which was planted on the roof of Yanka Kupala's theater in Minsk. So the installation here shows Minsk port. So Nazis who were captured during the liberation of Belarus, they were sent to Moscow, where they participated in the so-called Parade of Shame. And well, here on the photographs, pilots of International Air Regiment Normandy Neumann, so which included French and Soviet pilots. And in 1965 was found Yak-9, well, Soviet fighter, and with the help of the numbers on the engine, it was possible to identify the pilot. Well, and he was in the regiment Normandy Neumann. His name was Jacques Gaston. Well, he's in the photograph here. And, well, just 20 years after the end of the war, his mother found out what happened to her son. So, here on the photograph, you can see the Parade of Shame in Moscow on the 17th of July 1944. thousands of Nazis went across the streets in Moscow without, any weapon, without badges, without banners, and it was made to show the world that the Soviet Union is free from Nazis. Well, the liberation of Belarus was final step during the liberation of the Soviet Union, and after that it was time to liberate European countries. So for this was formed an alliance which included the Soviet Union, Great Britain, the United States and France. And on the 6th of June 1944, on the D-Day, was opened the second front in Europe. And as the result of co-work and cooperation of Allied forces, on the 9th of May 1945 was signed the Act of Unconditional Surrender of Germany. Well, it happened at Karlshorst, far from Berlin. From the side of Nazis, the act was signed by General Field Marshal Keitel. On the left side of the table, the representatives of Allied forces, and in the center, Marshal Zhukov, the Marshal of the Victory. The Great Patriotic War started on the 22nd of June 1941, and on the 9th of May 1945 it was over, but the Second World War continued because China suffered from Japan aggression, and in the showcase here we have photographs of Belarusians who were sent to China as part of the Red Army. They participated in the operation in Manchuria, and during 24 days operation, the Kwantung Japanese army was destroyed, and on the 2nd of September 1945 was signed the Act of Unconditional Surrender of Japan. It happened at on board of American battleship Missouri, and it was the end of the Second World War. So, it's a victory hall, the brightest and the most beautiful hall of our museum, which is dedicated to France, armies, divisions, brigades, which participated in the liberation of our republic, and many of them were named after Belarusian cities, which were liberated by them. And at the bottom, names of soldiers and officers who became heroes of the Soviet Union during the liberation of our republic. And when you see two stars near the name, it means that that person is 2 times hero of the Soviet Union. On the screen, in the center, this is banner of the victory, which was planted on the roof of Reichstag in Berlin on the 1st of May 1945. And the roof of the hall reminds about the dome of Reichstag. And we have the red Soviet flag. Maybe from outside you will see it better. The flag which was planted there to remind about the multicultural and multinational country which stopped the spread of Nazism around the world. During the Second World War, about 60 million people were killed all around the world, and more than 26 million of them were Soviet people. In our republic were killed 2,357,000 of civilians and prisoners of war. It was 1/3 of population, and even nowadays, some parts of our republic didn't reach the level of population it had before the Great Patriotic War. So that is why the aim of our museum is to remind people, to remind our visitors that the war never brings any good to any nation, just destruction, diseases, and final death. And co-work and cooperation could bring peace on our planet. Okay, so the tour is over. Maybe you have any questions?
Great tour. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your attention.